your background services actually can't be properly started into that state. In a lot of cases, it won't even work, okay? And in addition to that, this background broadcast, this boot completed broadcast, is very unpredictable in terms of its timing. In a lot of cases, this boot completed broadcast actually triggers much, much later than when the home intent and the home activity are fully up and running in the foreground. Okay? So if you're trying to synchronize between these two things, it's not a very good mechanism to rely on. In addition, I would recommend you don't use start service. For a similar reason, start service is limited by those same background execution limits unless you are starting a service in foreground mode. Now, foreground services require you as a developer to actually build in a notification that would typically display to the user when that service is running. Well, we took away the system UI where that notification would display. So you end up doing a bunch of work for displaying the service that it doesn't actually gain you anything. And in addition to that, there are some difficulties with started services when it comes to managing their life cycle. A started service, if that crashes for some reason, you don't have a direct connection to understand that that occurred and that you need to restart that service so that you can manage that process a little bit better. Now, Android does have this thing that services can return this start sticky attribute. And that's a way for applications to tell Android that this service is important, and if it crashes or terminates for some reason, I need it to be restarted. However, Android usually only does this about once or twice for a given service before they just sort of give up and realize that at some point the user will launch this app again, maybe this will start again, and everything will be fine. Okay? That type of thinking doesn't go well for those background services that have critical functionality in them like a device driver. Okay? So we recommend you use bind service instead. By using bound services, this gives the background processes an active connection to that foreground app. Okay? So you have a good indication of when that service is running and when that service has died for some reason, so that you can manage that, relaunch it if you need to, do any of those things. This also has the added benefit of a built-in communication channel between the applications that are bound. So you can do some more direct communication with that service without having to use intents or other mechanisms like that to pass data back and forth. So looking at this diagram again, one of the other important reasons to use bound services is that pure background applications, like those that would have been started by boot completed or just start service on its own, are very low priority on the scale. Okay? Whereas bound service applications are almost as high priority as the foreground app. They are literally the highest priority you can get without being the foreground app. So this ensures that those background processes stay safe from something like low memory killer if the device ever does get into a memory pressure situation. Okay? So you get better management of those services, and you get better protection from a memory management perspective. All right, let's take a look at what this would actually look like in code. So if I have just a basic example of a service here that has a device driver inside of it. In this case, this is just a device driver to take some button inputs and convert them into key events like they were coming off of a keyboard. All of this logic can be fully encapsulated into this external service and can run on its own. So we can build this service component, and then from the foreground app, we can construct an intent to that service component, and we can bind to it. Notice that I'm doing this from the application class and not from the primary activity. Remember our discussion from activities before and the life cycle associated with those. If this is a service that needs to be as persistent as possible, we want to bind to it from a component that is expected to be around just as long. Okay? So that you don't end up with life cycle issues where your activity gets destroyed, recreated, and you're rebinding to that service unnecessarily. It doesn't necessarily cause a major problem, but it's not the best idea. In addition, with bound services, this also means that you get this feedback mechanism coming through the service connection callback. So when you bind to a service, you provide this callback as a service connection, and when the service is up and running, you will be notified through the on-service connected method. So you know exactly when this is now something you can interact with or communicate with if you need to. In addition, on-service disconnected tells us anytime that service stops unexpectedly, maybe because it has crashed or something else has occurred, and at that point, we probably need to take a look at restarting this, especially if it's running some critical functionality on our device. So we now have the information we need to properly manage this functionality from within our applications, which we wouldn't get with started services or other of these more independent mechanisms.